Have you guys ever heard about redlining? I'm sure some of you have, but maybe not all of you know exactly what it is and how it still affects people of color today. So, redlining began in the 1930s during the time of the Great Depression. Okay, so FDR was president at the time. He passed the New Deal in order to help get Americans back on their feet. But really, it only helped white Americans get back on their feet. So the New Deal helped to create these government agencies, created the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, as well as the Homeowners Loan Corporation, the HOLC. Um, these government agencies would give out loans so people could get a mortgage. These were government backed mortgages, but the government still needed to design a way that they were actually going to give out these loans. So this is what you're seeing behind me right here. This is what they created. They created maps of the biggest cities in America, right? Over 240 cities in America were redlined, okay? You see all these red lines around here, right? They were breaking up the communities. And how did they do this? They had it rated on a scale of A through D. So A was the nicest communities, right? These were really nice communities. These were good investments for the government to make. And B was a little bit worse, C was a little bit worse than that, and D was the worst. It was labeled as a hazardous neighborhood, not a very risky investment for the government to make. At the same time, the government, well, the FHA, they started guaranteeing loans to veterans, the GI Bill. This assistance only only helped people who were white. It didn't help people of color. They were systemically excluded from this assistance. Out of $120 billion in FHA loans at that time, only 2% went to non-white applicants. Even if a person of color made more money than a white person, they would still not be allowed to purchase property in an A-rated neighborhood. These people of color would be relegated to D-rated neighborhoods or substandard housing. And a lot of these houses contain toxic substances that would make the homeowner sick. It would make their children sick, their children's children sick. So it just goes on and on. So, while the white families, they had government assistance in order to get their house and they were able to build up wealth over the years, it compounds, okay? So, while the white families were getting better and better, climbing the ladder, people of color, families of color, had to consistently struggle, and these effects compounded for them. And this looks like these neighborhoods are being underfunded or even intentionally destroyed by the intentional planning of freeways that break up these poorer communities and separate them from the nicer communities, the white communities, and essentially what's de facto segregation. So that means that it's not a law, it's not an actual law that, this is segregation mandated by the law. This is segregation that happens for another reason, it's kind of sneaky. So let's talk a little bit about how all of that affects our schools and the inequality in school funding. Okay, so we know that property taxes is what funds schools. So if you have higher property taxes, then you have more school funding. That makes sense, right? And if you have properties that are very high value properties, you're going to have higher property taxes, you're going to have more school funding. That makes sense. Okay, so these ratings, so the A ratings through the D ratings, all this compounds like we've been talking about, right? Students in D-rated neighborhoods, and they're not D-rated neighborhoods anymore, right? But they still feel those effects. So in these D-rated neighborhoods today, like the students that live there, they are more likely to go to a school that doesn't have as much educational opportunities as other schools. Schools in D-rated neighborhoods, they have larger shares of black and non-white students. They have worse math and reading scores compared to the A, B, and C-rated neighborhoods. And not only was redlining a part of it. But more recently, in the 1960s, HOAs started to become a thing, and they have kind of a shady past as well. All right, so HOAs, they started in the 1960s, but the practices that they've used to keep their communities exclusive have been pretty sneaky. Okay, so they used to have racially excluding language in their bylaws or whatever it's called, but today they'll have something sneakier. Okay, so more recently, like we know that you could be fined if you don't have things up to code. So for instance, uh, the whole idea of a lawn, right? So a lawn is like American dream, perfectly manicured lawn, white picket fence, all that good stuff, right? If you don't have your lawn, perfectly manicured, then you get fined. You get fined a lot, okay? So if you're a struggling family of color and somehow you make it into this nice community, this HOA community, but you're still kind of struggling. You just got here, right? Because people of color were often excluded from government assistance that that would help people be better off. So we're doing this. You're doing this all by yourself. As a family of color, you're doing this all by yourself. You get there, and you're working hard, and then your lawn grows higher than 2 inches one week. They slap you with the $200 fine. How is that fair? Um, and eventually, you don't have the time, you don't have the money. They're pushing you out of the neighborhood, essentially. In a very sneaky way. They're pushing you out of the neighborhood, and they're maintaining this perfectly nice, white neighborhood with high properties, high property values, high property taxes, good schools, and this is how they sell it to you too, right? Like this is a nice community. We have amazing schools. It's a safe community. I mean, who's it safe for? Really, because if you can't if you can't afford it, I mean, it's just very inequitable. It's like people don't even get a chance. So today, 74% of neighborhoods that the HOLC, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, rated as high risk 80 years ago, are low to moderate income today, and 64% are minority neighborhoods now. Economic inequality is significantly greater in these neighborhoods. Like we said earlier, home ownership is a road to generational wealth, something that non-white people have been systemically excluded from, leading them to live in hazardous environments that affect their mental and physical health. These communities now are more susceptible to gentrification, which really harms those communities, as well as these communities actually being hotter. So in nicer neighborhoods, like they'll have more greenery, they'll have more trees and all that stuff, and these trees actually help keep the community cooler. In poorer communities, there's less greenery, so it gets hotter. It can get like 7 degrees hotter, which is just crazy. Um, but yeah, just final thought. Structural racism, redlining leads to disinvestment in neighborhoods, racial segregation, disadvantage. Then we have risk factors in pollution, healthy food access, leads to poverty. It all feeds into each other, all of it. So I hope you learned something today. Yes, thank you.